Hey guys, how y'all doing today? Hope you're doing well. Um, if this is your first time here and you don't know who I am, my name is Barb. And here at Bows on Edge, you're going to hear stories about child abuse, child physical abuse, mental abuse, child sexual abuse, pedophiles, filicide, sex trafficking, child exploitation, kidnapping, and murder. And all my stories on this channel are based around children and the abuse and exploitation of them. So I just want to say that if any of these topics trigger you in any way, you might want to consider clicking off this video or this channel. But if you do choose to stick around and hear today's story, welcome, and I appreciate you being here. So let's just get into it. This story is actually many years old, but I wanted to do it because this woman is such a survivor and has such a good mental attitude and has endured a whole lot of crap in her life, and she's made her life worthwhile. So that's why I wanted to do it. She was impregnated 5 times by her own father, and the facts of the story are very dark and disturbing. So I'm going to go ahead and get into it. Her name was Aziza Kibibi. She was a woman who endured a childhood rife with sexual abuse and rape at the hands of her father. She was born on September 10th, 1977. And like many young girls, Aziza's childhood dreams were of fantasies, castles, princesses, My Little Pony. But before long, those dreams and her life would be forever altered. At just 8 years old, Aziza's father began molesting her. She said, "He told me to lie on the floor. He pulled my panties aside. He touched me, and with his hands and his mouth. I told him I wanted him to stop, and eventually he did. I told him she didn't like it. But by 10 years old, he was regularly sneaking into her room to rape her." At 15 years old, Aziza became pregnant, and she gave birth to a little girl. Also, at this point, while she was pregnant, her father was also beating her. And she read somewhere that stress wasn't good for a fetus, so whenever he was done yelling at her or abusing her or whatever it was that he was doing, she'd go pray and meditate. They moved into a house that was being renovated, and there was no plumbing. I'm sorry, my dog is behind me in my chair doing Lord knows what. They moved into a house that was being renovated, and they had no plumbing, and she said she was sitting on a Home Depot bucket when her water broke, and this baby just flew out. I wish my pregnancies were that easy. Every night, she said they would pile into a room. Her and all her siblings would surround her, and they had 3 Great Danes at the time. So 3 Great Danes and all the children surrounded Aziza while Aziza held her newborn baby. When this baby was born, she said she remembers looking into her eyes and just falling in love. The next 7 years would bring 4 more pregnancies, with all but one child not surviving. By then, Her dreams had turned from the innocent musings of childhood to those of a much older, desperate girl. She said she would dream about running away and getting all her siblings together, but one of her siblings was a baby. But she didn't care. She just wanted to run away somewhere with them. She said she was in a nightmare and she would try to sleep as much as possible because her dreams were better than what she was living. And now back in 2013, when this original story was written, she was 35 years old and she was living in an East Orange apartment with all her children. She was on track to complete a liberal arts program at Essex County Community College and had dreams of one day opening a restaurant. Her father, whose name was Aswad, what a fitting name, Aswad Ayindi, also known as Charles McGill, was eventually sentenced to 50 years in prison for the repeated sexual assaults he had subjected Aziza to. However, his term will only begin after he finished serving a 40-year sentence for also impregnating and raping and abusing yet another daughter. Aziza spoke at her father's sentencing, during which he repeatedly lashed out at her, calling her a liar and characterizing himself as a victim of the legal system. In spite of everything, she claims she has forgiven him and took pity on him as he was led back to prison. She's a better person than I am. She admits that day was emotionally tolling, but also a source of relief. She says she still has compassion for him, but she understands that he did this to himself. And based on court documents and Aziza's own accounts, compassion might prove difficult for some to understand, like me. I would never be able to forgive what she had went through. Aswad had been a Grammy award-winning music video producer, famous for the music video for Killing Me Softly by the Fugees. He grew up in Florida and Alabama, and he had moved to Paterson, New Jersey shortly after getting married to Aziza's mother. Now, he and his wife Beverly were high school sweethearts, and Beverly worked as a business clerk before becoming a full-time housewife. They spent the early part of their marriage living in a third-floor apartment in the city's East Side Park neighborhood. His wife's parents, who immigrated from Jamaica, had lived below them. And although Aswad was a strict father, Aziza describes her early life as fairly typical. She was homeschooled, but was allowed to interact and play with other children in the neighborhood. At first, she was allowed to do this. Her parents taught her, and then she taught the younger kids. She said when she turned 13, her father forbade them to study, but she kept at it and kept secretly teaching her siblings. She wanted to learn. Her family eventually grew to include 8 siblings, all of whom were born at home, and eventually they moved into a larger portion of the home downstairs. When Aziza began to mature, however, everything changed. He told me I was special. Initially, he said, it was to teach me to be a woman. She said by the time he started to have intercourse with her, he was getting more violent. When she would start to fight him, he would hit her and threaten her. And by that time, Aswad had fortified himself by exerting nearly total control over his wife and children. Apart from sexual abuse, Aswad was also physically abusive toward Aziza and her siblings. Whenever Aziza or her sisters confronted or resisted him, he would hit them with heavy tools and like boards, knives, stools, steel-toed boots. His punishments were severe and sometimes included sodomy. The family eventually moved out of Aziza's grandparents' home and moved into a former funeral home. And at that time, strict limits were imposed on interaction outside of the home. They were only allowed small amounts of TV with anything that depicted typical family life, which was strictly forbidden. Western medicine was also a foreign concept, and Aswad informed his wife that his sexual interactions with Aziza were healing methods aimed at curing a persistent case of eczema. How ridiculous is that? Any defiance was quickly squashed with his fist. Every time her and her mom went food shopping, if they weren't back by a certain time, violence would happen. She first witnessed him beat her mom around the time he started raping her at 10 years old. He beat her mom with fists, belts, 2x4s, a wooden slat with nails, and once with sheetrock. The smallest things would tick him off. One night, when Aziza was 11 years old, her father already had sex with her, so she decided to go into the kitchen and sneak a taste of his junior cheesecake. We weren't allowed any kind of dessert, she said, but he loved cheesecake and she wanted to try some. When she closed the refrigerator door, he was standing right there. Excuse me. He said he was going to teach her a lesson. He took her to the bathroom, and that was the first time that he sodomized her. She didn't understand why he was punishing her this way. And from the beginning of the abuse, he told her that all fathers did this. Since she didn't speak to the other girls her age, she didn't have any way of knowing that. He also threatened to kill her if she didn't participate, or he'd go after her younger sisters. So her life became, how can I protect my family? How can I fake sleep? And how can I get through the moment? The abuse escalated after a mistress of Aswad informed his wife that he was having sex with his daughters. He eventually declared himself a polygamist and later a prophet whose behavior was the product of direct instructions from a higher power. She said that he had foreseen the end of the world, and only his family would be spared, hence the need to create a pure bloodline by impregnating his daughters. He told us we could not pray to God and that we had to pray to him, and he would get the messages to God. The delusion grew stronger after his first child with Aziza was born healthy, after which he decided it was his duty to keep the bloodline pure. Aziza said, I don't know if he expected her to have some medical issues, but when she didn't, he used that as proof. She was validation. The children to come would not be so lucky. After a failed pregnancy, a daughter was born with what's called PKU, which I cannot pronounce. It's phenylketonuria, a rare genetic disorder that prevents the body from effectively breaking down amino acids and can cause brain damage, seizures, and other serious symptoms. A son came 3 years later who was generally healthy, and she was tasked caring for her young children as well as many of her brothers and sisters, not sisters. Aziza receded into her private world, taking small pleasures where they could be had, in cooking, writing poetry, and short stories, and of course dreaming. One time she had been beaten after her father discovered a journal that she had been keeping. The household became increasingly bizarre. He brought home various women to live with them, calling some of them his wives, and he also began to introduce Aziza as his wife too. And he came up seemingly endless ways to violate her, as she would later testify in court. Sex acts with his girlfriend or girlfriends, sex acts with a dog and a cat, and also him choking her during intercourse. Once she turned 13, he demanded sex once a day and sometimes more. Multiple attempts at running away failed, though she always held out hope that God would present her with a way out. When she was 14, she caught her father assaulting one of her sisters, and it was crushing. She thought she was protecting them and felt everything she had done was a waste. She barely talked for a while. She was so depressed, and any kind of help seemed out of reach. But in 2002, she got what she had been waiting for. With Aswad away on a business trip, her son suddenly went into seizures. Now, after a brief hesitation, she opted to take the brave step of taking him to a nearby hospital. It was a gamble, she said. She wasn't socialized, and the questions they were asking, and she didn't know how to answer them. The case piqued the interest of a social worker who alerted the State Department of Youth and Family Services. Aswad he flew into a rage upon his return home, threatening to take the boy out of the hospital by force. However, the children were soon taken by the state and placed in separate homes. Aziza's oldest daughter said, "Suddenly, I'm 6 years old with my foster family, and I didn't like it there. I was going to school for the first time, and my brothers and sisters are with different families. And I'm just waiting and counting the days till I can see mommy for our monthly 1 hour visit." A 1 hour visit a month. That's ridiculous. Aziza said the caseworker told her that her daughter was banging her head on the wall, she was sitting and rocking back and forth, and not talking or eating. She said she couldn't stop crying. Aziza said she started reading books on family law and taking parenting classes and doing everything she could to get her kids back. And after a year and a half, they worked it out so that a relative could be a foster parent for her. Aziza, her mother, and her sisters began staying apart from Aswad, though he continued to regularly threaten her as she completed state-mandated courses and counseling in hopes of regaining her custody. She also said he raped her during this period, which resulted in yet another pregnancy. Aziza said she started working at the Limited and then at a restaurant, and interacting with people for the first time was total anxiety. Her father took all the money that she made, and she said when she was 24 years old, she finally stood up to him. He was about to go to bed with one of her sisters, and she said she was so angry that she screamed, "Leave her alone." She called him an asshole and went off on her mother too. She said to her mother that she couldn't believe that all this time she could not protect them. She expected her father to punch her in the face and knock her out, but he just looked shocked, and he sat down in silence. And it hit her. He's just a punk. He's a coward. And she realized she had never seen him fight a man. He only victimized women and children. And this time, her daughter was born with both PKU and spinal muscular atrophy, which rendered the girl completely disabled, unable to walk or care for herself. Aziza's mother divorced her father, and she testified in court that she had been a victim of his violence as well, and admitted that she had not been there for her children. Aziza's grandmother had also called the police on more than one occasion, as well as children's services, but each time they were left singing his praises. He told them what to say and not to say when children's services came around. After successfully winning custody of her children, Aziza says she had become a stronger person. She said she was learning the system, taking your child to the doctor when needed, taking parenting classes, and with DYFS monitoring her, it was her just realizing, wait a minute, there are people out there willing to help. And it empowered her. She said at the same time, her children became her only purpose. When Aziza's daughter came back from foster care, she started asking her mom about her father. Aziza didn't think that she was ready for this information. She even made up a story about a fake daddy. But one day, she said her daughter came to her when she was 13 years old and was like, "Tell me the truth now." And Aziza said the words just came out of her mouth. Aswad is your father, and he is my father too. And her daughter was like, I knew it. She started calculating in her head and was like, so that means he is my grandfather and also my father. And your sisters are my half-sisters too. Aziza told her that she was raped, and her daughter said that this brought her closer to her mother. Aziza said that they were close, and she was in her 20s and her daughter was in her teens, doing all the things that she dreamed of. Friends, and school. She lived vicariously through her journey. Her daughter would do her homework with her at the kitchen, and she said that's how she knows her American history. And they, along with the other kids, would all sing together. Aziza had minimal contact with her father until 2006, when she and her sisters finally decided to pursue criminal charges against him. She claims many of them were concerned about the effect a case could have on their children. With her father behind bars, Aziza went about rebuilding her life. While caring for her children, she was able to obtain her GED. She got married and had another son. Despite the trauma that came with her earlier pregnancies, her devotion to her children is unwavering. She speaks proudly of attending college alongside her daughter and of her son's blossoming dancing and artistic talents. A large picture of her youngest daughter, who succumbed to her disabilities in 2010 when she was just 9 years old, is displayed prominently on the table in her living room. She said that she misses her so much. And there was a specialist who regularly sees parents who struggles to care for young children with rare disorders. And she said Aziza's dedication left an impression on her. She had been an exceptional mother. She is so attentive, patient, and it's remarkable. For a young girl with all that she's had, she's just been wonderful. At the time of the story, Aziza was focused on completing her schooling and hoped to one day start a nonprofit foundation to help victims of childhood sexual abuse, particularly those who have become parents. A small baking business called Sincerely Z had been gaining steam, providing cakes for weddings, birthdays, and other events. She continues to write poetry, and she has written a memoir about her experience, which she hopes to have published one day. Sharing her story, she believes, will not only provide her with a greater sense of peace, but help others who may have been through the similar ordeals. She said, I can make a difference. I always asked what my purpose was. Even with eventually suffering, I still had to ask God what my purpose was. Instead of just being an experience that I had, maybe this strengthened me. What doesn't break us makes us stronger. Aziza is now the founder and CEO of Precious Little Ladies, Incorporated, a nonprofit organization with a mission to end child sexual abuse and gender-based violence. Her inspiring journey from victim to advocate has made her a leading voice in the fight against gender-based violence. It's for the protection of children and the promotion of women's rights. Women are the foundation of our society, and children are the guardians of our future. We must protect and support them because they represent where we come from and where we are going. If that is destroyed, then the present has no purpose. Well, guys, it's such a sickening story, but it ends so well. If you're going through anything like this, try and get help. I know sometimes it can be very, very difficult and it feels like nobody's on your side. But listen, if you're an adult and you're dealing with domestic violence, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. But if you're a child, or if you're an adult witnessing a child being abused, do the right thing. Call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD, which is 1-800-422-4453. Or you can even go to their website, which is www.childhelp.org. These things need to stop. There's too many children that are going through this bullshit. And that's what it is. It's bullshit. If you enjoyed the story and haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to my channel. Hit that thumbs up button, the notification bell, so that you know the next time I upload another video. Until next time, guys, peace.